Well, here we are. We're finally continuing our ongoing series on meditations of the tarot. We're here today to talk about letter 16, the Tower of Destruction. I'll just open. I'm joined here by Shari and Dr. Michael Martin, as usual. So I would open up to the two of you. What are your initial thoughts on this letter?
Well, the first sentence on my note page is "Body is a miracle of wisdom." That was a quote from this.
Right. Yeah, so that's a good place to start. Is that so? This chapter is about the last chapter we discussed was letter 15, and it kind of dealt a bit with egregores and the hierarchies of evil that are not necessarily human evil. And this chapter is about where we locate the root of human evil. And Tomberg says it's not in the body, and that's which is where the context of that remark that you made. So
contrary to so much I hear from Christians, right?
Yes.
They blame the body for everything.
Right, which is like I was thinking he's destroying Gnosticism with facts and logic here. Really.
and that is the kind of Gnosticism.
Letter 16 of Meditations of the Tarot. Tomberg destroys Gnosticism with facts and logic. Right.
Well, that's the Gnosticism that infects the fathers. That's a Gnosticism that infects most of Christianity, at least to some degree. Mm-hmm. Where and it's extended to that canard that the earth is not our real home.
Yeah.
Okay, where is our real home? Heaven. Where is that? Haven't you ever read the Book of Revelation?
Yeah.
Or Genesis? I mean, come on.
When in Christian history did people start first thinking of like heaven as the destination?
That's Platonic. That's a Platonic notion that happened, I think.
Well, that's a bad reading of Plato, though.
It is, but it's a Platonic reading.
It's a preferred.
Well, it's not a bad reading. Plato says the spiritual reality is the real reality.
So we would probably place that in the Renaissance then, right? Because that's when people would have started like really reading Plato.
I think way before that.
The fathers. It's in the patristic period.
Yeah.
Not all over the place, but it's there for sure.
Which fathers? There's a lot of them that it's not in too.
Tertullian, the first one that comes to mind. Origin. Even as much as I like.
Yeah, definitely. Origin.
Augustine. Augustine was a kind of a he was trained.
Yeah, but this origin.
Origin's I think a little bit more complicated case though.
That's what I mean.
This origin excerpt that he has here kind of gives the body a break, right?
Right. Like well, of course, we all know the story about Origin. I think it's told by Bede that he castrated himself.
Yeah, but that
now some people say that's not actually true, but the fact that it even crept into the Christian imaginary is but
it crept in much later, I think. And John Bear, like I've got his version on First Principles, and he's got a lengthy introduction, and he disputes that pretty much.
I know, as I said, but the fact that it's been part of the Christian imaginary for well over 1,000 years says something.
Yeah,
but it's not that, and the thing is because it's not that far-fetched, because you find so many expressions of disdain for creation and the body, and it's usually projected onto women. That's where it is in Tertullian. In Tertullian's book, I don't want to ruin the Latin title, but it's on the adornment of women.
Yeah, I heard you talking about
women
that.
Not only for alluring men by their beauty, but he connects it to the fall and then to the crucifixion. So it's women's fault that Christ was crucified because Eve was pretty and allured Adam. How dare you?
Yeah,
that's a pretty hard notion to support on any like honest reading of Genesis, though.
Yeah,
I know, but the fathers are like, hey, we're all celibate monastics. That sounds good to me, right?
Well, it's like that. it's like that podcast that I watched yesterday with you and Mike, and Mr. Thorpe. It was, someone comes up with this great idea, and for 350 years,
Nobody questions.
the heart is a pump, right?
Yeah.
Nobody says, like, it's crazy, while I read it. It's like, I have this story of, I was traveling one time, and I went into like a roadside gas station restaurant, and there was stuffed jackalopes on the wall, and the placemats were scenes of jackalopes in the wild, right? And I was in the prairies, first time I had ever been in the prairies in Canada, and I'm like, wow, they have jackalopes. And I was, anyway, totally convinced. Like, I was staring at these things on the wall, and just I was, my jaw-dropping moment for me, right? And then I was traveling with this guy, and I mentioned, I kept looking whenever I saw any roadkill. He goes, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I'm looking to see if it was a jackalope." And he goes, "Oh, those aren't real." And I said,
What?
I said, "I've seen one."
Wikipedia. Yeah.
And it took him forever to get me out of that space where, because I read it or I saw it, I believed it, right?
Right.
That's
I have
really
documentation.
I want to tie this
Yeah.
back to, I want to tie this, what you're talking about there. I want to tie that back, because here we have, like, what was going on in your part is just like an innocent ignorance, right?
right.
And so Tomberg in this chapter, he talks about how essentially you have a Eastern explanation for evil and a Western explanation for evil.
Yeah,
Eastern
yeah,
explanation is tied to this idea of ignorance. I would dispute that's really the Platonic explanation too. So I think, which is very much part of the Western tradition. So I don't know if I would agree with the strict East-West division. And then he says that the Western version is that it's what he locates it in the will. It's like a misalignment in the will.
You mean Tomberg?
Yeah, let's see if I can find it.
Yeah, he says, I've got underlined here, temptation would be impotent if it did not find a terrain already prepared in the human soul.
Right. I'm talking about, go ahead.
I'm just going to read this little bit here. The unfortunate misunderstanding locating innate humane evil in the body instead of in the soul is due to a tendency towards a materialistic interpretation of the biblical story of paradise and the fall. Indeed, if paradise is understood as a place on the terrestrial or material plane, and if the fall is similarly understood as having taken place on this plane, innate human evil cannot be understood otherwise than as biologically hereditary, i.e., that it is the flesh which bears it and transmits the seed of evil from generation to generation. Then it is the flesh which is the enemy of the soul and against which one has to struggle. Hence, one disciplines it by flagellation, one weakens it by depriving it of food and sleep, and one scorns it and mistreats it in many ways. One is ashamed of one's body. However, it is the body which rightly has more reason to be ashamed of the soul inhabiting it than the latter of the body. For the body is a miracle of wisdom, harmony, and stability, which does not merit scorn, but rather the admiration of the soul. Anyway, I just...
Right. What I'm talking about is a little bit further on from that, where he says it's not in the body and the soul, but then he's like, well, what about where he's moving on to try to locate what it is in the soul, and he presents that like two views, and he said, and he tries to present because it's Tomberg, he tries to create a synthesis of those views.
Yes. Yeah.
And one is ignorance, and the other is a misalignment of the will.
You got a page number there?
Yeah, hold on a second. It's pretty early on, like let's see.
Because he talks about negative asceticism and positive asceticism, which I think is really, really nice.
Here we go. You're right. I found it. Okay.
Page?
Yeah, it's on page 300 or 436.
Okay.
where he
Okay.
talks about the left wing and right wing tradition.
Right. They're at the bottom.
Oh
Right.
yeah.
So he says, let us now to return to the problem of innate human evil. What is it? It is ahamkara, the sense of self due to avidya, primordial ignorance, caused by Maya's power of projection, associated with Maya's power of obscuration, which contains the illusory identification of the true self, Atman, with the empirical self, as clearly attested by the revelation of scripture, direct, authentic experience, tradition, and inference. This is the answer according to the ancient wisdom of India from the mouth of Shankara, the author of this summary and synthesis. It is desire engendered by ignorance, which consists in attributing the central role to an illusory mental construction of the self, whilst the center is nowhere or everywhere, answers Buddhism. So this is his description of like the left wing of which he's, so it's obviously he's drawing from Eastern sources here. I would say this is also the Platonic notion, though.
Okay.
Yeah.
The Platonic notion aligns with this as well.
Yeah.
And then he says the other current of tradition, the right wing entity of wisdom, if you wish, the Western Egyptian Jewish Christian current, gives another reply. According to it, innate human evil is not due to primordial ignorance, but rather the sin of knowledge at one's own instigation instead of through God. So that's like I talked, like, to me, that I associate that, so it was me associating that with some kind of like movement of the will. Because of the at one's own instigation.
There's a sense
as opposed
of
to through God.
There's a sense of conscientiousness in that. You know, taking responsibility for one's own whatever failures, you know.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's also, I mean, I think part of the human problem, you know, the fundamental existential problem is we tend to think of the fall as something that happened when human beings were in the same shape we're in now, the same physical form we're in now.
Right.
And I don't think that's how it is. But I think a close reading of Genesis, for instance, I probably mentioned this before, is after the expulsion from the garden, it said, you know, where usually you see, here it is right here. It's, you have Adam and Eve dressed in a fig leaf. It's before. So from the vegetable kingdom to the animal kingdom, right? The etheric body to the astral body. And then when they after the fall, you know, people act like they were wearing the skins of animals, right?
Right.
That's sometimes it's translated as
garments of skin,
but it's not. It's the coats of skin is an accurate translation,
Right.
not the skins of animals.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So when I read that, I think of going from almost like a state of being like elementals or angels, where it's not this, you know, not like angels, probably it's someplace between angels and elementals, where it's not physical like we're physical, but somehow after the fall this happens. And he mentions later, and then when he talks about Atlantis, for instance, right, this that after that people end up living in caves like Neanderthals, right, or as Neanderthals. That's the fall in a way.
Mm-hmm.
which kind of rectifies the Christian biblical picture of and Genesis picture of things, with the doctrine of evolution, right?
Well, he presents Origen's account, which in Origen's account there is a clear like the fall happens in the pre-existent like state before we've descended into materiality. That's right in this chapter. So that's what he's presenting. But I would say that without even positing that kind of mythology, and I don't mean that in any kind of insulting way, because mythology often like contains deep truth. I think you can see in Maximus the Confessor, you have the idea that our fall happens simultaneously with our coming into being. So there is no actual like temporal gap between the fall and our coming into existence. Like
which kind of demands some kind of reverence for the actual material world, because if that's coming into being, right, having garments of skin and senses and the ability to experience creation, then it's a gift, you know. It's like there, you know what I'm saying? Like there's, yeah, I'll just.
no, well, no, but that does, because okay, well, I mean, drawing from Maximus again, it's like for Maximus, like creation is incarnation. So if
Right,
that's the
and
case,
I think so too.
there's not another world to be transformed. There's not
I haven't-
another world. There's no other world that's going to become the new heavens and the new
Yeah.
earth.
Where it's like, well, like,
We're not
yeah,
going some
otherwise you
other
become L. Ron
place.
Hubbard, right?
We're
Right,
not
right.
we're not going some other place. We're transforming the place where we are, and Christ is the power that
And this is why creation
initiating that
groans and
transformation.
waits. This is why
Right.
creation groans and waits, right? Because it's waiting for that. It's waiting on us, you know.
Right,
Yes.
exactly.
Yeah.
That's exactly it.
Yeah.
It is waiting on us. And that's like, I mean, I'm sure this will make some people not very happy, but that's, I don't know if you remember, I was talking this with some of our Jewish friends the other day, where it's like, I think that the way I understand the second coming, especially in the context of our constant continual Christian talk about the church as the body of Christ, is that the second coming is it's not something that we're not waiting for Jesus to literally come riding in the clouds. Like that cloud imagery is about veils being lifted. And it's like Bach says, where it's like the approach of the entire supersensible world. It's something that it's like that happens collectively. It's not, the second coming happens in us, in our transformation. That's where it's realized.
What? No, leave the door open.
And it's happening all the time,
Yeah.
as well as it being a collective eschatological destiny.
Well, that's why when I look deeply into Maud's eyes, and she's my oldest ewe in the flock,
Mm-hmm.
I feel like an idiot. I do.
They're down by you.
Yeah, she's looking at me and she's just like, would you hurry up?
Right.
I'm groaning and waiting here, man.
Yeah.
Like, I am so tired of waiting.
Well, and that's that's Sophiology 101,
Yeah.
right? That's the problem with the technosphere they're trying to move us into.
Right.
It deprives us of the opportunity to do what we were sent here for.
And this is the primary metaphor he's
Right.
working the whole time. He talks about like the difference between the garden and the tower, right?
Yeah,
So
it's literally sorry to interrupt, but I just wanted to
No,
make
it's
a
okay.
point, because Michael said this before. It's literally extending death, not life.
Right.
Technocracy, right?
Mhm.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. Mhm.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. Okay. So this is the thing. It's like, so there's no other world that we're going to other than this world, which we're waiting to be transformed through Christ.
Yeah.
And that transformation happens through us
Mhm.
in the collective. I don't think that salvation is a team sport. This idea that it's all about just like individuals being saved is really wrongheaded
It's
and
a
inadequate.
simpler notion. It's a simpler notion, I think. Yeah.
Right.
And don't you guys would think about how does this all figure into the first epigraph that Tomberg uses for this letter, which is the Magnificat?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
That's a good, yeah.
Yeah.
By the way, have you guys been watching The Chosen?
No.
I have not.
It's really good.
I saw the first.
I heard it's really good.
I saw the first two seasons, but I haven't seen the current one.
Well, at the end of the second season, isn't that the one where Mary is remembering the Magnificat, and she never told Joseph the whole thing? He heard him say a little bit of it when she was getting ready to deliver Jesus. she started saying it to herself, and Joseph says, "What's that? Is that a poem you made?" And she never tells him the whole thing. And then later she says,
That's
she always
interesting.
regrets that she never told him the whole thing, because what she does is she writes it down, or she has Mary Magdalene write it down and give it to Luke so
Oh,
he can put it into his account.
wow.
And it's
Gives me
powerful.
chills. That gives me
Oh, okay, I'll
chills.
have to watch season 3. I've watched the first 2 seasons. I kind of like, there was a little bit like, it got a little too evangelical-y at the end of season 2 for me, with the whole like idea that Jesus would engage in this like stagecraft kind of thing.
Oh yeah,
to
for
amplify.
the
Yeah,
Sermon on the Mount.
that was like, come on.
But it was right after that, at the last episode of season 2, is when they do this thing on the Magnificat, which is and the birth of Christ, which is
Gotcha.
a little weepy. I'm just saying.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Well,
what's
so
the
anyway, what do you
question?
think about him using that here in this chapter or in this letter on this particular topic? My soul magnifies the Lord.
I have to admit, I'm stumped.
Wait, let me read it. My soul magnifies the Lord. You should read it, Shari, because you're a woman.
My soul magnifies the Lord, and my spirit rejoices in God my Savior, for he has regarded the low estate of his handmaiden. For behold, henceforth all generations will call me blessed. He has scattered those who have proud thoughts in their hearts. He has put down the mighty from their thrones, and he has exalted those of low degree. He has filled the hungry with good things, and the rich he has sent away empty-handed.
So my immediate thought is the reason he would use that for this chapter is he's contrasting the tower builders who are disrupted by the thunderbolt with those who have actually heeded the call to tend the garden.
And speaking of tower builders, you guys been keeping up on the World Economic Forum meeting in Davos?
A little.
Yeah. Jesus.
Isn't there like actual headquarters, like some like actual?
I don't know what
they
it
actually.
is. They must
It's
have a
something
good
to do
deal.
with
They probably
Babel,
get a
though,
good
right?
deal on
There's
the
a
holiday
Babel
when they're
reference. Isn't
filled
there a
up.
Babel reference directly in the World Economic Forum's like headquarters building?
Probably.
I think
They're
so.
so out there.
They're insane. I mean,
They're insane.
it's demonic.
Yeah.
I can't remember.
But I think that's so. In fact,
I just actually watched an excerpt from Jens Stoltenberg yesterday, who is the head of NATO, who actually said that weapons are the way to peace.
that's what they've been. Yeah, that's
Just
that message.
take
No,
that.
I'm so glad you said that. I'm so glad you said that,
Just
because
take that.
let's look because there's something that Tomberg doesn't address that I think is evident here, and that is under the surface, and it's implicit, because well, what is the temptation that causes us to desire something that does not come from God? What is it that the serpent promises?
Oh, that you'll be like God.
You'll be like gods, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's power. It's
Power and immortality. There's something about immortality.
And that's what transhumanism is promising.
Exactly. Power and immortality.
Precisely.
And as Tomberg, and obviously I'm not saying something that Tomberg would disagree with, because in an earlier letter, Tomberg said that power is the root of all idolatry. And if power is the root of all idolatry, and no idolatry is the first commandment, then that would seem to properly link it here, where he's talking about the origin of human evil in the soul. So he says it's a both. He doesn't say it's an either or, right? He says it's both an ignorance and it's a desire for power. And I think here's where you can see that those things coming together is that what we're ignorant about is what God's power looks like.
Well, this is the thing.
Because God's power is love.
It's weakness. Like, okay,
Right.
like, so this is really interesting, because having gone through the book of Job, there's this one character named Eliphaz, and he basically talks about the fact that, the total depravity, okay, like that's his message, total depravity. And then he gets visited by a spirit in the night, and the spirit, it just hovers like inches from his body, like his hair is standing on end. You get this, sense, and the spirit reiterates that to him: no one is righteous, right? And then he tells Job about this, because he's trying to help Job see that he's for sure done something wrong, because no one is righteous, right? And no, I lost my train of thought. What did you what did you say just before that? Because something really struck me when you said that, when you were talking about that. Dang it, I don't know why.
Rewind tape. Yeah.
Was something that Michael said or something that I said?
No, you asked this question, and
Oh, I was talking about that where the ignorance comes together with the will to power, basically. Yeah. I mean, that's what he's saying. It's a combination of what we have here. The origin of evil, of human evil in the soul, is a combination of both ignorance and the will to power.
Right. So
it's ignorance is because power isn't what we think it is.
Right. And then I said a weakness. I mean, I said this is what I was trying to get to. So what's really interesting is it started to become clear to me that Satan is disgusted by human beings, right? He's disgusted by them because they're weak.
That's right.
They are not powerful. And yet God says, I'm going to use that to display my strength, right? It is through weakness that my strength is made manifest.
Right.
So then we get into this hatred of the body, because the body actually represents that weakness, right? Like that it's made from the dust, the dirt.
Well, I want to talk about that for a second.
It's so interesting
because there is a lot. I mean, obviously there's lots of scripture that talks very negatively about the flesh, right? But the flesh,
the same thing as the body.
Exactly. It is not the same thing as the body, because specifically the word sarx refers to dead meat, right? I actually there was something that I was listening to a rabbi talk about like the Jewish dietary laws, and he's like, it's not supposed to make any sense. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I mean, it's like, I don't follow them, but it makes perfect sense. It makes perfect sense to me that you're not supposed to mix milk and meat, because meat is dead flesh, and milk is the very stuff of life from the mother that gives sustenance to the baby,
right?
So it's perfectly, from a symbolic point of view, it makes perfect sense to not. So the rabbi shouldn't be telling people that it makes no sense. Well, and also he also like makes this move where he says it's like that's how you know something comes from God, and it makes no sense. No, that is not. Things come from God. When it's like you wouldn't have never thought of it on your own, but once you see it, you can't unsee
Don't commit adultery. That doesn't make any sense to me.
So, right.
So, hey, just a little sidebar.
Yeah.
Something I'm really interested in. So, speaking of milk, that I found out that I think there used to be in part of Christian initiation, whether it was the Eucharist or baptism, that milk and honey were part of it.
Oh, interesting.
And I just saw something recently. I saved it on my phone because it was like a diagram somebody had. And I think even to this day, Ethiopian Copts at the first communion, which usually happens when they're infants, not only are they given bread and wine, but they're given milk and honey.
Oh wow.
Right. So this is the call into transformation of the world, right? To make it into the land of milk and honey.
Yeah.
So this is what the job of the church is. Like, this is what the church is supposed to be. That's why the idea that the church should be reduced to just like a department of the state, or a completely separate domain from the state represents the church like essentially neglecting its job.
Well, and that's I don't know if you saw, I just wrote a blog post about this, about the ecclesial state of exception, which is about, I mean, come on, if you can be honest with for a cotton picking minute, you look at church history, it's a history of capitulation to the state.
Mhm.
Yeah.
You know, and nobody's, you
From
know,
323
the Orthodox
on.
try to exempt themselves, but I'm sorry, they're even worse than Rome. Look what's going on
Oh,
in
yeah.
Ukraine, with Ukraine and Russia right now, with
Right.
the patriarchs.
Yeah.
You know, it's inextricable because because those guys like power,
Yeah.
and they like the powerful people, right? They're attracted to that, the church leadership, and every leadership. We see the same thing with evangelicals, right? You see the same thing with Justin Welby. Oh my God, don't even get me going on this guy. They get so
He is like, how is he in
co-opted by
it?
the spirit of this world, right?
Why did they get rid of Rowan Williams in order to put that guy in charge?
Rowan Williams was not really an administrator, and this
That's
guy
true, but he's a brilliant. At least he's
brilliant
a decent
and a
human
holy
being
man. I think. Yeah,
and a holy man and a brilliant theologian.
yeah.
Justin Welby is just a freaking.
He probably didn't want the
bureaucrat. He's terrible.
He probably did not want the job. But anyway,
yeah, I'm sure Rome was probably glad to be done with it. Honestly,
well, yeah,
certainly.
And you know, part of my own struggle over the last couple of years as a Catholic was first when the Vatican would not, you know, mandated the vaccines for all employees of the Vatican.
Yeah.
And then the Pope is selling it as an act of love. I'm like, okay, I'm done. I'm done.
Yeah.
You know, this, you don't even know what's in this thing, dude. So but that's just an example of being coerced by power. And actually, my friend Guido Preparata, he has a book coming out pretty soon, which I wrote. I don't know if he put it at the beginning or the end. So it's either the foreword or the afterword. His book is called Church and Empire.
Oh.
And he used to teach at the Gregorium, so he was about as connected to the inside of Rome or the Vatican as you can get. And it's pretty chilling what he writes in there about exactly that thing, about the courtship. In fact, he pointed to the neocons of the 70s and 80s courting Rome to have kind of like spiritual clout to gather the troops.
Well, didn't that all start with, like, I mean, I know probably before that, but that there's the, you know, the marriage of Charlemagne and
it goes back to Constantinople.
Yeah.
Because Rome was like this backwater.
Well, I mean, the politicians know that if you have control of a person's heart, you have control of their mind.
Right. And I don't know if you've seen this movie. I think it's a great movie. It's super violent. The Book of Eli.
I have seen that.
I just want to say something really, really quick here. I want to point out that what we're talking about right now is not at all a sidetrack, because essentially, like, the project of the state is very much represented in the image of the Tower of Destruction,
absolutely,
the Tower of Babel,
because
and also it is offering a false salvation, a false route to God, a false route to paradise.
Right.
So it is actually related.
Right. So anyway, going back to the Book of Eli, spoiler alert. So it stars Denzel Washington, and he's awesome. He's just, what a guy! It's such a good actor.
He is,
but
fantastic.
In the film, it's a post-apocalyptic deal, right?
Yeah.
And the Book of Eli, the title is the Bible, and he has a copy of the Bible. It's like the only one on Earth.
Yeah.
He has a copy of it, and this guy who's like a mafioso type, dealing with the cannibals and post-apocalyptic the world. He is played by Gary Oldman. And he wants that book. He wants that book because he knows if he has that book, he can control people.
Yep.
Because he can give them hope. He can offer them hope.
Yeah, he can.
And Denzel Washington's character Eli does not want to give him the book. So that's the part of the dramatic structure of the film, and I think it's absolutely right. So, and I think
What do you think the meaning of he's blind in that? Denzel Washington's
he's
character in the
blind.
film was
Well, you don't
blind.
find out he's blind till later in the film.
Right.
Yeah.
But why do you think he's blind? What do you think's going on with that? Why make him blind?
Because they quote St. Paul at the beginning, we walk not by sight but by faith.
Yes.
That's very good.
Yeah, I was thinking
from the film.
I mean, I forgot that part, but I was thinking that, yeah, he was walking by faith. Yeah.
It's about as Christian a movie as you can get.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And what I love in the film is when the bad guy finally gets a hold of the Bible, it's in Braille.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, right.
And so at the end of the film, spoiler alert, Denzel Washington lives, but he's getting old, and what he does is he gives the Bible, he dictates the Bible. He has the entire Bible memorized.
And it's the one who has eyes to see is actually blind when it comes to the physical realm.
To the material.
Kind of beautiful.
Yeah.
But
he's
and super violent too. But
yeah.
But I think, and that's an example of this relationship of power to faith, and I think people of, and this is why I think you have to say that Marx had a point when he said religion's the opiate of the people, right? Even though later Simone Weil corrected that by saying it's revolution, not religion, that's the opiate of the people. But I think the point taken is that by use of religion, power structures can keep the people quiet, right? And put up with stuff and just go along, right? And I think that's and we see this throughout our Western culture, well, probably throughout the whole world, but I'm familiar with the Western cultures. You see it throughout, right? And as Nikolai Berdyaev mentions, by this point, the whole world was supposed to be Christian.
Right.
What happened?
Well, in some ways,
we failed in our mission, is what happened. There's no other way for Berdyaev. There's no other way to conclude this.
Yeah.
Right. But it is Christian in a way, though.
What is?
Like the world has been definitely transformed by Christian sensibilities.
Right. It's absolutely true. In fact, I saw something. I've had too much espresso already, so I'm going to just talk a lot.
Go for it, man. Go for it.
Yesterday, my wife shared with me this interview of what's her name?
No,
well,
we don't.
Eric Metaxas was interviewing. What's her name? I'll tell you. I know her name. The woman, the person. You know who I'm talking about. Hold on a second. It's right here. It's here it is. I don't. The name is escaping me. The woman who was always on about the vaccines, and she was Al Gore's campaign manager.
No, I don't. I'm not politically connected enough to.
No, you won't. Hold on a second. No. This is super important. That's why.
We
have to wait a second here.
We can wait.
Here we go. I put it on Twitter. That's why I'll find it right here. Naomi Wolf.
Okay.
That's what I'm thinking of. So Eric Metaxas interviewed Naomi Wolf. And
I subscribed to her Substack.
And it's about the most, and she let the cat out of the bag in this interview. I mean, because she's been throughout the course of these last 3 years really delving into the Bible, both Old and New Testaments. And she came up with some radical proclamations about Jesus.
Okay.
And she's actually, I think she stepped into a prophetic mode.
Okay.
And it was interesting to see this woman who you couldn't, I mean, she was an icon of the progressive left,
Mm-hmm.
right? Here in a conversation with Eric Metaxas, who couldn't be more conservative
Yeah.
Christian,
Right.
Yeah.
right? And they it was interesting because they both graduated from Yale in the same year, you know. So and actually they're my age exactly. And so it was interesting to watch them have this conversation, and it was inspiring to me because here you get people from essentially two opposite worlds
Coming together.
meeting at a right place, and the meeting place is Christ,
Yeah.
Right.
right? And it was all about, this Tower of Babel we're talking about, and so what is the thing that um that that we used, what's the armor of light to battle these? And she even used the word principalities and powers,
Right.
right? Because for her, it's not just about Klaus Schwab and Bill Gates and the World Economic Forum gangsters. It's about spiritual powers working through them.
Yeah.
And that's where, our bet, this talk about the theme, right? Our contention is not with flesh and blood.
Well,
right?
that's like that first quote that I read there about, that the ground is temptation is possible because the ground is already laid, right, within the soul. And I don't know about you guys, but I got really excited from like page 452 to 456 in this
Okay.
in
What
this
was
book.
what was it?
Well, he talks about the good news, right?
Yeah.
The good news that the world received more than 19 centuries ago is in no way that of successful surgical operation of freedom from suffering.
Mm-hmm.
No more is it that of the successful construction of a tower attributed to man, small though the tower may be, or of unparalleled grandeur, i.e., reaching up to heaven, but rather it is that of resurrection. And then he goes on to talk about that there, Hermeticism has embraced forever the law of living life, the cross as its way, and resurrection as its ideal. For this reason, there is nothing mechanical about it, nor is there anything surgical about it, right? In Hermeticism, one does not build and one does not seek to accomplish any divorce. And then he goes on to talk about the lotus centers on page 452, second paragraph at the end. The lotus centers grow and mature in the light, warmth, and life of the true, the beautiful, and the good, without any special technical method being applied. Mm-hmm. The lotuses, just like the whole human being, develop according to the general law. And of course, I had this little rabbit hole thingy with water in my head because I watched your thing yesterday, your podcast, and he talks about what creates this easy water, right, where you get this space that's clear of all impurities, and it's sunlight. Sunlight, and it also creates energy. And so like these patterns of renewal and resurrection are there. They exist. There's nothing, for us to add something to it or take something away from it is only to destroy it, right? We have to, and he goes on to say here that, let me see if I can find it here. The kingdom of God, he has this verse in Mark. The kingdom of God is as if a man should scatter seed upon the ground and should sleep and rise night and day, and the seed should sprout and grow, and he knows not how. Right? Like, you just do you do the thing that's in front of you, so to speak, right? You sow the seed, and then you just go to sleep and get up and go to bed, get up and go to bed.
You don't have a committee meeting about how to get the plant
right.
to grow. Yeah.
Right. And then he goes on to say, it is attention due to the desire to understand, which sets the lotus of intellectual initiative in motion. And I put a little side note here, curiosity. Attention due to the desire to understand. That to me is what curiosity is. Mm-hmm. And I've heard a number of, scientists and people lament the absence of curiosity in science, right? Like that just doesn't exist anymore. And he reiterates it when he says, the calculating machine certainly has its place in the scientific work of today, but it or anything analogous to it has no place in Hermeticism, where personal and original effort of thought is irreplaceable. That's curiosity again, right? Hermeticism does not want to use any instrument. It has nothing to do with the desire to have ready-made answers. Its questions are crises, and the answers that it seeks are states of consciousness resulting from these crises. This is why Hermeticism, being the art of becoming, the art of transformation, transubstantiation, and transmutation of human consciousness, cannot make use of any intellectual instrument, because it seeks answers from states of consciousness that result from crises, right? Okay, so like if you think about that, this gets to my whole shtick about not fixing things, right? Don't fix it. And this is something the alcoholic in AA knows. They have to hit rock bottom, right? They have to get to the crisis point in order for them to pay attention, to have that kind of curiosity that, as he puts it here, results in that state of consciousness. And then he goes on to say, the symbols are mystical, Gnostic, magical ferments or enzymes of thought whose troubling presence disquiets thinking and calls it to immerse itself to ever new depths, right? And then he talks about the impasse of evolution, of how you reach the pinnacle of your whatever, your intellect or your physical capabilities or whatever. And he calls it the great boredom of the impasse.
And he links it to specialization, which I found interesting, which made me feel really good about being the intellectual dilettante that I am.
Oh, yeah.
Because I have religiously avoided exactly that kind of specialization.
Right. So. Yeah. And I have too. And I think Michael is right in the same camp. Like,
well, that's, people ask me to define sociology. I'm like, really?
Yeah.
Well, because people want it to be, well, not just sociology, but they want anything to be able to be reduced to a system, which it gets into a little bit, a couple paragraphs on.
Yep.
Right. And that the thing is, those kinds of systems or intellectual constructs are just like it's a Aristotle's organon, it's a system of categorization, but it doesn't really have that much relationship to reality, right? Because once you have that organon or that structure, you try to, and you see this with Nate, and I saw it in getting English degrees, right? You get the feminist critic or the Marxist critic or the post-colonial critic, and you can't say, you go pizza. Oh yeah, pizza was taken by the West from China as a way of oppression or whatever, right? Or and that's what they read everything through that lens, right? Through that system, through that
yeah. And he describes a guy. He describes
and this allows them from responding to things in an authentic way. And it's the same thing. And this is what a problem I have with everybody, but like really strict ortho bros or rad trads, because they want to they interpret everything according to the fathers or to whatever it happens to be, and they can't respond to anything in the moment as it is. They can't do they can't do Christian phenomenology,
which means they are making themselves immune to the movements of the spirit.
And
I mean, that's what they're doing. Because the spirit flows. It doesn't want you to. It doesn't want to be captured by you and put.
Well, John Vervaeke makes the point that it's ossification that happens. Actually, like you just hardening. It's what happens to all the characters in the Narnia Chronicles, right? When they all turn to ice, they just they've ossified. It happens a lot in mythology, actually.
Well, that's how Satan is portrayed.
pillars of salt and such.
And in the Inferno, that's how Satan is portrayed too, right?
When you look back,
he's frozen in ice. Yeah.
Yeah. And
Like-
Lot's wife who looks back, right?
Like
To what?
my favorite Hans Christian Andersen story, The Snow Queen.
Yeah.
You know that one? Have you guys ever seen?
No, I don't think I know that
I've
one.
showed it to my kids. There's you can find, you used to be able to find it like on YouTube, probably still there. There's a 1950s cartoon of it that was made in Russia, which my sister and I saw when we were little, and I just love it. It's so good if you can find it on YouTube. It's maybe 45 minutes long, hour long. It's beautiful.
I gotta watch it.
Yeah.
I gotta watch it.
But it's the story, right? Because what happens is the shard of ice gets in the boy's eye,
Yeah.
and then he sees everything mechanically, and his heart becomes frozen.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And he disappears into he becomes a captive of the Snow Queen.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this girl who loves him, and they're just little children.
And it's true, right? Like this is the cold, what we call cold calculation
Intellect,
of the World Economic Forum.
Oh yeah.
Right? Like people can't believe that they would actually make a marketing scheme to promote you'll own nothing and be happy. There's people are like, what? Like that's such cold calculation.
You ever read that? It was a news magazine article.
You know what? That's not such a bad idea as long as they don't own everything.
Well, yeah, somebody's
going to own you.
Trust me.
Yeah, exactly. That's the problem with that.
But the weird thing is that that article was originally published in 2016.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Long before the pandemic, right?
Yeah.
And I have my students read it, and when I read it the first time, I thought it was a parody.
Yeah.
But no, they're serious. This is how stupid Satan is, right?
Yeah.
He thinks it looks smart. It's so dumb.
I know.
And the charge of the students are like, "Is this a joke?" I said, "No, it's not a joke. This is what they actually think would be a good thing." What? Where not only do you not own anything, you don't have any privacy either.
Well, the scary thing is though, when they start to think that it's a good idea, that's when.
Well, I have had some of those students, but now they're a couple of years ago. Now they're starting to think it's not a good idea.
Oh, good.
Thank God.
Thank goodness.
Well, yeah. I mean, I guess the thing to be optimistic here, in this chapter, when the way Tomberg talks about this, is that we can count on the Thunderbolt.
Exactly.
The Thunderbolt is coming.
I can't wait till it gets here.
Yeah, and that Thunderbolt,
baby. Yeah.
He actually says that Thunderbolt is death. Towers will be struck down by thunderbolts, and balloons will be blown down by the wind. In the last analysis, it is death and birth which constantly save human evolution, by acting as the thunderbolt which strikes down and as the wind which blows down. It is not deeply significant that the spiritual head of the religion of liberation from the wheel of reincarnations is sought. Then he goes into this Dalai Lama stuff, but then he says further down, this is on page 457. I have no doubt that death, which saves us from the impasse to which our bodily organization leads, is the action of the thunderbolt of divine love, and that birth, which gives us the possibility of participating actively in the earthly history of the human race, is due fundamentally to the action of compassion for this earth and for mankind which inhabits it, at least for a certain class of souls.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I thought that was interesting because I missed the devil conversation, but the one before that was death, and there he talks about how, those appendages are just like
and death is scything them just to make sure that they don't, for their own good, right?
Right, like because they're the extremes, they're the extremities, right, that stick out, right? And so interesting.
And I love how he contrasts the building of the tower with the growth of a tree.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Because something more organic in keeping with nature. And in fact, he even says it, I don't know which page it was, where it talks.
I have it, page 450.
The tree part, that was awesome.
Page 451, he says, this is why we have repeated so many times in these letters that practical, i.e. lived, Hermeticism is neither occult science nor magic, nor gnosis, nor mysticism, but rather their synthesis, for it is a tree and not a tower. It is man himself, the whole man, who is at one and the same time philosopher and magician, Gnostic and mystic, who is this tree. And then he goes into the Sephiroth tree of the Kabbalah.
Maybe,
Um,
yeah.
Yeah. And of course, that reminds me of that guy that wrote the forward to the signature.
The part that comes after that is really beautifully written, though. I really like that. Like right after the introduction where he says, "Is this therefore the Sephiroth tree?" He says, "Yes, but above all, I would most love to see here the tree of death and resurrection, the cross from which the rose springs.
Yeah.
This is the cross that is mortifying and vivifying at the same time. The cross where the agony of Calvary and the glory of resurrection are united."
Yes.
I'm getting ready to talk to Dr. Chris E.W. Green on Wednesday, and I just read his book on All Things Beautiful and Aesthetic Christology, and I was listening to I've been listening to some of his other stuff in preparation for the conversation, and he relates this story of how he hates it when people come up to him and say, you're a theologian, because he always knows that it means he's going to get a terrible question. And he tells a story this one time that someone asked him, like, what Christ was doing when he was dead. And his response was nothing. He was dead. Like, so this is the thing is that we can't, like, we cannot separate death from resurrection. It is necessary for resurrection to be a thing. It has to be preceded by death, and it has to actually be death. This is what the meaning of the conquest of death by death is.
Mm-hmm.
By death he trampled death, and to those in the tombs he granted life. Right?
Have you ever seen the picture of Christ in the tomb? I can't remember what's the Holbein?
Oh, yes. Which
Holbein.
scandalized Dostoevsky, but Bulgakov actually writes in praise of.
I love it.
Yeah.
I've always loved it. It's suffocating, that picture. It's this long, I think it's 6 feet long, actually.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And that's why I think a lot of I like a lot of the aesthetic movements that Christians get kind of like upset about. I think they don't realize how profoundly Christian it is to try to extend the notion of the beautiful to that which you don't automatically find beautiful.
All right, look at him.
That only Christian culture would do that. Like, how can you not see how profoundly Christian a thing this is to do?
Well, yeah, look at all the monasteries in Europe that have the skulls of the deceased monks lined up in a sort of shrine or catacomb.
Right.
Yeah. He calls that the transmutation. Here, I have that underlined here. There is no other hope in the world and in its history than the alchemical process of the transmutation of evil into good.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like that's what you're talking about there. And I love the fact that he uses the alchemical term transmutation, because people like to
requires death.
Yeah, people like to use the word
avoid death. You can't avoid death to do it. Like that's right.
Yeah, and but transmutation is not it's destruction, but in a different way, right?
But he uses that in the context, of the conjunctio oppositorum, the conjunction of opposites, and then which gets him into, and this is the archetype of marriage, right?
Right.
I mean, it absolutely is.
Yeah, and he goes into divorce. Do you want to talk about that?
Well, yeah, because this is another place where he's contrasting like kind of the Eastern approach, which is really kind of like just a divorce, right? An escape where the higher self escapes from the lower self.
Mm-hmm.
And he points toward the Christian idea being not a divorce, but a marriage.
Well, I wrote in the side here, in the side lines, and anyone who's married will understand why I wrote this. Why I never got divorced. Because you know what? If you're married long enough, you would love to get divorced at some point in time. There's always this thought. But it says here, the marriage of opposites is a principle of universal significance. This is not a compromise that one contrives, but rather the cross and the magic of the cross. It is thus that the true self is united to the lower self in the human being, where the lower self is the cross of the true self, and the true self is the cross of the lower self. The two poles of the human being then live in the presence of one another, the result of which is an alchemical process of gradual approach to one another. It is similar with the hierarchies of the right and of the left in the world and in the history of the world. They can neither be united nor separated. They are engaged in a millennial-old discussion where the arguments are facts and the conclusions are events. The hierarchies of the left are the cross of the hierarchies of the right, and vice versa. There is no other hope in the world and in its history than the alchemical process of the transmutation of evil into good, the sacrament of penance on a cosmic scale. Divorce between the two sides would be an irreparable catastrophe.
Well, this is the instinct that you see happen where people want to separate Christ from Jesus, right? Because if you can separate Christ from Jesus, you can have a resurrection without death.
You can have a resurrection without death.
Yeah, you can convince yourself that you have the possibility of resurrection without death, without actual death.
Well, yeah, and
if you don't, if you don't separate Christ and Jesus, you can see how this is an impossibility.
right, and you can see how Jung is haunting him right here. I mean, this is definitely a big influence on him.
Yes.
This is one of what I think Jung's most important and most complicated book is the mystery of the conjunction, right?
Yeah.
Because it's big fat book and it's complicated, but I this has also been a kind of a preoccupation of my own, because I can't believe how many times I've written about marriage, even when I put out an edition of The Chemical Wedding of Christian Rosenkreuz. Okay, can you stop talking? No, I never stopped talking about marriage.
Yeah.
I can't figure it out. No, that's my wife says, what do you know about marriage? But you don't know anything about this. But because I think it's the central problem of our time. Because if you look right now, I mean, the definition of marriage has changed, right, over the last decade, maybe 12 years. But following that, then the true, I mean, because what happens, and I think you know this, through marriage, you do alchemically enact the conjunction of opposites.
Exactly.
Right.
You do. It just, and I tell people, a friend of mine had been married once and was divorced, and was getting older, and they go, why couldn't I ever find anybody? And I didn't know what to tell her. But to myself, I know you can't stay married if you're not willing to change.
Right.
Right? That's never going to happen. If you think it's always going to be like how you are right now when you're 27 or however old you are when you get married, it's not going to be like that, because you're constantly changing, and so is the other person. You're changing each other, and if you don't let that happen, it's not going to happen.
And growth, Michael, is this key concept in this chapter for Tomberg, and he's contrasting growth, which is what we want, versus building. Right.
And so
organic.
And he talks about, war and divorce being the surgical approach to things, right?
Right.
Yes.
Right.
But I think in our own cultural context, so if we go back to when the definition of marriage started to change, to now, I mean, you see, I think it's an absolute crisis of children really mutilating their bodies or because they were born in the wrong body, right? But what is that but a surgical intervention to try to enact the conjunction of opposites?
Wow.
But it's destined to fail.
Oh, that's beautiful.
It's not going to succeed ever.
Yeah, that's really good.
Because
it's confusing. Because the entire
at the beginning, with the confusion between the body. See, we're blaming the body. It's not the body. It's the soul that's having trouble here.
Yeah.
Right. This is a soul problem, not a body problem.
It can't be solved with surgery.
Right.
But the thing is that this is why it's caused by our materialist frame, because the only thing to blame it on is the body, because there is no soul.
There's nothing else to blame.
So the fact,
even though the people say I'm in the wrong body,
the fact that the fact that as a biological man I feel strongly connected to my anima must mean that I have been born in the wrong body. Therefore, I should become a woman. It's
That's
a
right.
complete category confusion.
You know, Tomberg talks about how it's this, you know, he doesn't talk about gender issues, but he's talking about flagellation and starving the body and on doing all these things to your body, right? To punish it because of its carnality or whatever. But essentially what he says is that you're mistreating it, right? And so if you think about it as this, what did I call that at the beginning? A miracle of
negative asceticism.
wisdom. A miracle of wisdom.
Right.
Is the body. And I mean, I've had this ongoing body question, right? Because I see it as a miracle of wisdom. It's like it's taking in everything. I was talking to my husband about this last night at the dinner table. I was remembering how I was living in Telegraph Creek and I was all by myself out in this field and I was pulling weeds because we just turned the soil and we were going to plant with hayseed, and all of a sudden it got super quiet. The birds all stopped singing. Everything was just silent. And I went, oh, I looked up. I was like, I've been here too long. And then a bear showed up, like just like that, right? And then the whole thing got really crazy. But anyway, I said to him, why did the birds stop singing? Because they have no reason to fear the bear. Okay. The bear, they have wings and they're in the top of the trees and they didn't all fly away. They just went quiet. And I thought, you know, it's as if they were warning me.
Yeah.
It's as if they were saying, hey, pay attention. Right.
And you were just talking about the miracle of wisdom and the body, and then you started talking in very sophiological terms. I wonder why that could be.
Thank you. But to back it up, so you mentioned earlier, because right at the beginning, Tomberg mentions Berjayev, and he calls it negative asceticism here.
Yeah,
but Berjayev's word is a false asceticism.
Right.
Which you see rampant in Christianity. You know, like those people who announce they're going off Facebook for Lent, or
oh, I know.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know.
You know, you ever see that? There's a funny meme. Yay, they have received their reward already. But or my favorite meme of all time, the Orthodox one, you know, orthodoxy, Christianity, only harder, right? It's all false asceticism, right?
Yeah.
And Berjayev is really good on this. If you can, I don't know, can't remember which book he writes about it the most in, but he writes about it quite a bit, and he critiques that kind of sadomasochistic strain in Christianity.
Yeah.
With a kind of true asceticism, which is what Tomberg is trying to encourage here.
Which I would classify as Rilke's, the point is to live everything.
Yeah.
So this is, I found where he said it's on page,
because that's really hard.
Page 435 toward the bottom is where he contrasts positive asceticism from negative asceticism. He says positive, 435 toward the bottom. Positive asceticism does not struggle against the body, but rather against the seed of evil in the soul, for the sake of its reunion with God. For example, the only food that Teresa Neumann ate for decades was the host from the sacrament of Holy Communion. This was not because she struggled against the body or despised it, but rather because she really lived from the Holy Sacrament without prejudicing the health of the body. And if, for example, another passes the night in prayer without sleep, he does not do so in order to deprive the body of rest, but rather in order to unite with God in prayer. I kind of think this is something that Pentecostals kind of get right. In a lot of Pentecostal practices, there's a lot of...
He actually says on the next page, positive asceticism is universal. Everyone practices it.
Right. Yes, I love that.
Okay. And that's why I made the point. The point, Rilke says the point is to live everything, because you know what? To really live, to not deny the body, to not deny, to have compassion on yourself. That's the hardest journey to make. It is.
Just want to point out the example he gives to demonstrate the universality of that the movement of positive asceticism is the scientist in his laboratory.
Yeah, well, the guy that shuts himself in. Yeah.
So there's a connection between positive asceticism and seeking.
curiosity.
Right.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
so it's one time. So before we get done, I want to ask you guys a question because he also gets at this. Let me see what page it is. Here, it's on page 438. When he talks about purgatory.
Mhm.
Yes.
So I want to ask you guys. So I'm talking to an Orthodox and an Episcopalian here, or Anglo-Catholic. What's your
I'm
take
really
on-
a Catholic.
What's your take on?
I just
on
play an
purgatory?
Episcopalian on YouTube.
I don't
just play
know.
one, yeah.
I don't know much about the Catholic version of purgatory. The only concept of purgatory I have would be from George MacDonald, and I would take it from Lilith, where he asks, Mr. Vane if he would like to go and sleep, right? And then takes him into this cavernous, cold place where there's all these people sleeping, and they're all waking up at different times. But what's happening to them is they're healing while they sleep, right? And that that's kind of, from that perspective, I don't have a problem with it.
Well, I gave you the wrong page number. It's 444.
Or
444. Okay. I was going to say. I
For
didn't
every
see it.
man who is not a saint or fully righteous, or a fully righteous man builds a kind of Tower of Babel.
Yeah.
Which is his own. His actions, opinions, and aspirations, autonomous or personal, constitute a private world that he has built and that he bears within himself into the spiritual world after his death. This subjective world must there pass through the trial of meeting with transsubjective spiritual reality, the Thunderbolt. And this meeting of subjectivity with the spiritual reality is the essence of the postmortem stage known by the name Purgatory.
Yeah.
Purgatory is therefore the state of soul where the actions, opinions, and aspirations of the past life are seen in the true light of day of transsubjective consciousness. No one judges it. It is the soul itself who judges itself in the light of a completely awakened conscience.
Yeah. Yes.
I love the
Which-
fact that he
that.
used the word transsubjective, which is basically the same thing as where Vervaeke's invented the word transjective. They're talking about the same thing. So I just want to point that out really quickly. And then the other thing about that is I think I really like the idea of him connecting the idea of us building our towers of Babels with us building a world, right? And and this actually connects to this idea of higher self and lower self. It's the false world is built in accordance with the principles of the lower self, with the lower self being misaligned with the higher self, with it not ever having come into marriage,
Right.
which is where sin falls from. This is where sin moves, by the way. It is in the building of the tower that sin moves from being simple ignorance to an actual act of the will.
Mhm.
It's in the building up of that false world,
Right.
and that's what has to be destroyed in purgatory.
Right. And so, I mean, I think that, as I've said many times before, I think the best book ever written on purgatory is the Tibetan Book of the Dead.
Right.
Yeah.
Because it describes just what he's described right there is exactly the situation in the Tibetan Book of the Dead, though it's much more laid out in detail. But I got to share this story with you. This happened recently, maybe a couple weeks ago. My mother died in November,
Right.
and I had this dream sometime in the beginning of January that I was with my sister Mary, and Mary was showing me photographs. And the first photograph was of my mom when she was younger and had long hair, and my mother never had long hair.
Hmm.
The second picture was my mother, and her face was starting to be obscured by light. And in the third photograph, my mother's face had been entirely replaced by light.
Oh wow.
And I was thinking, when I woke up, I thought that must be where the state she's been going through for the last 60 days, right? So she's been transformed into light, right? So she went. I'm guessing, especially I think because when she had dementia for so long,
Yeah.
she was already.
Yeah, I was thinking that myself actually.
She was
Yeah.
already.
Have you read the accounts of the eyewitnesses at Bulgakov's deathbed?
No.
Where they reported him actually glowing.
Is that in the Sophiology of Death?
There's no,
Yes,
it's not,
it
but
is.
is it?
I read it. I think I read it in there. Maybe
No, it's actually Al Kimmel has it on his blog. I'll
Okay.
link it to you later.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting. I mean, it points to a spiritual reality that I think, unfortunately, all Christian traditions are not united in acknowledging that reality, and I can't deny it.
No,
I
I can't.
cannot.
No,
The
yeah,
reality of
yeah,
purgatory.
No.
right.
And I like it that he says
I
that
can
the
deny the
soul,
reality of hell to a degree. To a
yeah.
degree.
It's just
Well,
all purgatory to me.
Yeah.
well, he says here that no one judges it. It is the soul itself who judges itself in light of a completely awakened conscience. And I think that judgment is not the way we think of judgment. I think it's a knowing as I am known, right? It's like
Right.
it's like an aha moment. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, okay. Oh, now I get it. I was doing it all wrong, right?
Right.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, because ultimately it's like the ignorance is actually, I would say, the deeper root of the evil.
Well, this is why we can
Because it's
say
out
people
of
are
it,
striving.
because ignorance is what causes the building of towers.
Right.
Like
And I think
everyone who builds a tower thinks they're doing
Well,
good.
here's
that's
an
what I was
example,
gonna say.
and I think this is a great example. So very often you see young people who have been, psychologically damaged in some way. They abandon the Christianity or the Judaism of their childhood, and start experimenting with witchcraft or magic or something. And it's very clear to me, because I've met gazillions of these people over the course of the years, what they're actually trying to do is trying to get power
Yeah.
to protect themselves because of the,
The
say
pain.
if you get abused in the Catholic Church or in the Orthodox Church, and whether it's sexual or psychological or whatever it happens to be, you don't want to submit yourself to that kind of, to be under somebody else's power again.
No.
So they start to seek power in other means, which it leads to danger in a different ways, right? So, for instance, meeting, my wife knew this young woman. She was probably a teenager, maybe even 13, and they were doing Ouija board stuff. And this girl got so connected to these spirits that the cup that they had a wine chalice that was going on the board, and it would go without anybody touching it. But that girl, and she was traumatized by her parents' divorce and all this other stuff, and that girl ended up drug addict, prostitute, etc. Right? Really bad adult life. I don't know if she ever got out of it. I haven't seen her in a long time. But I've seen this happen again and again and again and again with young people. They get damaged and they want to secure some kind of power, and which is they've been subject to somebody else's Tower of Babel, and now they build their own.
Right.
Right.
I think there's more going on than that too, because I think like, especially this seems to be kind of like this is a very much a modern phenomenon, and I think that that is part of it for sure. But I also think that the versions of Christianity or Judaism or whatever their background is that they're getting is such a desiccated corpse of a thing that they're being given with no life in it.
No.
That they're looking for. They're also, so yes, I think that's right. I think they're tempted by sorcery, but I think they're also seeking enchantment.
That's the other thing. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's true. And that's why I have so much affection for neo-paganism.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I just do. I mean, because I think, what they're actually looking for is Christianity. That's how we should do things around here. But now we're enlightened.
No, well, they're looking for the
we've
light.
accepted science now. Now we get to tell everybody how of all these Catholic thinkers who are actually scientists.
Yeah.
Because it's street people, right?
Yeah, I was reading some stuff recently about like early Christian magic because I'm working on a Grail Country role playing game.
RP baby.
I'm working on a Grail Country role playing game. I'll explain how it's a Grail Country role playing game at some point. But I've been doing a bunch of research because I don't like the way Dungeons and Dragons handles magic at all, because it's completely disenchanted, and it's essentially
It's science.
handles
Yeah.
exactly, it's a magic as science paradigm, and I want magic to feel like magic in
Yeah.
the game that I design. So I'm just completely tossing that aside altogether, and I want to actually like have a magic system that is actually connected to folklore and mythology in a real way. So I've been doing a bunch of reading to see about like what that actually ought to look like. And
Cool.
one of the things that I ran across in my research was like these early Christian magical ideas. And like one of the things that people would do that I found was interesting is that they would like write bits of scripture onto like little pieces of paper in like cross formations that would then be folded up and kept on the person as like
a mezuzah, right?
Yeah, very much like a mezuzah.
Yeah.
Like a Christian version of that.
I'm down with that.
Mm.
But I should probably get going. Somebody's going to pick up some milk in a little bit here. We're gonna
No
get
problem.
ready.
I think we covered most of what I wanted to cover in this chapter. I thank you both for joining me.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Everyone for listening. Till
Very
next
well.
time.